Good morning, everyone, and I hope you're having a wonderful start to your day. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on Conversations with Paola. I am your host, Paola Espitia with Ola'pi Creative, and I'm really excited that you're here to join us this morning because we are going to be having a really in-depth conversation about sustainable seafood. You know, we started this series, Conversations with Paola, as a way to get to know the wave makers of the world, the people who are doing something to enlighten us, inspire us, educate us about how we can be better stewards of our ocean. And today we're really excited to have Miss Adriana Sanchez joining us on episode 31 of Conversations with Paola. Adriana, how are you this morning?
I'm good. Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely. It is a real pleasure to have you on board. And we actually got a chance to meet, maybe it's been like 5 years ago now. Has it been that long ago? At,
I
at
think
a
so.
music festival.
Yes, a music festival of all things.
A lot of things. I mean, we were having a great time, but I really especially loved that we were in the conservation village. This was Tortuga, and that's a really special thing about that particular music festival is they do have this conservation village, and we had a great initial conversation about your work in sustainable seafood. And I know you have a lot of roots to the water. What, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us, what is some of your favorite memories of being on water?
Well, I'm from Venezuela originally. So I remember when we were kids, we lived on the coast. So my mom would pick us up from school and then we would go and just spend the afternoon in the water and we did a lot of like hanging out at the beach and snorkeling and really learning, and Venezuela is so beautiful and has this amazing resources. So that was really like a connection. Sorry, connection to the water. And my father, when he moved to the United States, he started a seafood company. So that further brought us together more, the water as a not just like a beautiful thing that we get to enjoy, but also as a resource, that fed our family because of the business, but also, you feed people, right? So Tortuga Music Festival, when we met, I was actually the sustainability director for Sea Delight, which is the seafood company my family owns. And we were at the conservation village trying to educate consumers about what is sustainable seafood, what kind of questions I need to ask, and just kind of create more consciousness about the seafood we are eating and putting on our plates. And we may not necessarily know where it comes from or what the industry as a whole is doing to improve the supply chains and the sources that they work with. So that's how we met and it was very exciting. And I've come a long way since then. I left Sea Delight in 2017 and started Seafood Ninja as a consulting service. And I also worked for Fair Trade USA as business development for the seafood program. And now the seafood responsible seafood strategy for a hotel chain in from Spain. So lots of to talk about. And I think one of the key messages that are constantly I feel like I'm missing, when I talk to families and friends, is like, what is sustainable seafood and what are the things that they need to be looking for when they go buy seafood. So I think this is a really great opportunity. So thank you so much for inviting me to this episode so we can talk about sustainable seafood as a consumer, not as, industry, but what we can do.
1,000%. And that's exactly right. It's exactly why we have you on board. So let's dive in then. I mean, the very basic question, what is the difference between, or what is sustainable seafood? What does sustainability mean in the seafood industry?
Well, it depends on who's defining this, but I think we all agree that sustainable seafood is ways that we can harvest, whether it's a wild caught or a farm raised, seafood product, that it has a minimal impact on the environment, that are coming from fisheries or farms that are well managed, that follow regulations. In recent years, that definition of sustainable seafood has um, become a little more broad. It's not just about environmental, definition. Now includes people. ensuring that fishers' livelihoods are protected, that there's no human rights or labor violations or child, violations. So we're looking at from this holistic approach, and this is one of the things that we did at Fair Trade is talking about it like environmentally and also about people because they're like interconnected. There's like livelihoods depending on the entire supply chain from that fisherman that catches that fish to the people that process it, transport it, and then, import it and ends up in our plate. So there's this very complex supply chain. So sustainability needs to ensure that not only the longevity of that resource, right, that we have fish in the future, but also that the entire industry that depends on this resource can continue to exist. So it's very exciting to see how we have evolved, in this subject of sustainability for the past like 20 years or more. I'm like, I've been doing this for 10 years now, but I know this has been going on for many, many, many years. And I think last year we celebrated 20 years of sustainable seafood movement. So here we are.
And that was actually one of the big impressions I had when I first got into conservation was realizing that you can't walk into a community or a culture and say, okay, you've been over harvesting this thing, and even though it's part of your tradition for thousands of years, no more. We don't care about livelihoods. We don't care about what happens to the people. It's about the animal. And that is really not how conservation works. I mean, in order for the solution to be long term, all stakeholders, everybody who's a member of that interest has to have an opinion and has to have a seat at the table. So you
Yeah.
mentioned farms when you were talking about sustainability. I think that might be something that people are not familiar with. What is the difference, or how can we talk about the differences between wild caught and farmed, and especially when it comes to making an eco-friendly choice?
Yeah. Oh man, that is such a hot topic. I've talked to people that are like, go wild or go home. And then you have people that are like, well, farmed aquaculture is going to feed the next billion of people. And then you have the media that sensationalizes everything. We're eating sponges and mud, So it's
Please.
very funny, right? Like you're like, oh, all this tilapia is going to kill us. But the truth is that the industry as a whole, because of this idea that we need to feed the next billion and we need to be environmentally conscious, has done a tremendous in like technology advances. We know also being pressured by the NGO community about, hey, if you're going to farm, we need to do it more sustainably. So there's research on how to do alternative feeds that are not just wild caught fish that then gets processed into to feed, but using crickets as protein, or how can we improve the way that we farm so we don't have to use antibiotics, or the use of hormones has really been this very critical part why people don't want to eat farm raised. But the truth is, and I always say this, not all farms are created equal.
Yeah.
So if and I have my rules, right? Like if I go and buy a farm shrimp, I make sure I look at the bag. And if the ingredients says, there's 10 different things that I cannot pronunciate, I will not buy that shrimp. But if it just says shrimp and water, then I know, this is more like friendly for my family. There's eco certifications that you can look for in the store. You have Aquaculture Stewardship Council. They certify both, well, they certify aquaculture, and they for the certification you can use like hormones. So you can rest assured that whatever certified by ASC, which is Aquaculture Stewardship Council, doesn't use hormones. You can also look at best aquaculture practices, BAP. They also have their own logo, and they are like readily available across the store. I always say too, like sometimes like the retailers that we source, like we buy our products from, may not use eco certifications in their fish case, but they have commitment. So you can always also check their website to understand what their sustainable seafood commitment is, and then look either for their own signage or learn, be like, okay, I know that they're sourcing responsibly, so I'm gonna be like safe if I go to a Publix. Publix is doing this. And we're in South Florida, so I can tell you Publix, Aldi, Walmart, Walmart, Sam's, Costco. Everybody thinks like Whole Foods is the only one that is doing, something for sustainable. But no, like we have all these retailers with very deep rooted commitments towards sustainability that we can just simply go to their website and learn about what they're doing and then use our purchasing power to really reward that they are participating, in this change. Because I think when the movement started, the NGOs realized very quickly that this isn't a business, right? Like we're an industry that feeds many. So you can't just come and say, "Oh, we can't buy this," or "Don't buy this," without saying, "Okay, how do we improve?" You know, and there are fisheries that need that improvement. That it's not just to say, "I'm not going to buy this product," but how do you invest in improvement? And
Yeah.
that's how we like launch, fishery improvement projects with a clear pathway towards certification, or because not everything can be certified. So what do we do if that is not a possibility? How do we lead change by improvement? So that's like the other piece that we don't really talk about, because as consumers, we might look for a label, but behind that label, and even the product has no label, there's all these improvements that are going to happen because we need to make sure that we have this resource for the future so we continue to eat fish.
Yeah, I mean, 1,000%. Like, I think you just dropped so much information on us right that
Yeah.
the industry that people have no idea about. And even just what you were referring to before, that there's this human element, that there are people who are suffering as a result of some of these fisheries. And how interesting that some of these larger corporations are the ones that are stepping up and taking a leadership role in allowing us, helping us be conscious consumers. The labeling, that's an interesting conversation, right? Because you know understanding what the MSC, Marine Stewardship Council certified, like what that might mean versus another type of label. But also too, there's been issues with labeling of fish, and so that adds this other dimension where a nice whitey, meaty, steaky looking fish is labeled one thing, but in actuality it's something else. Is that still an issue?
I would love to say that it's not an issue, but it happens, and I believe there was a research done that the mislabeling happens at the restaurant and retail level, not necessarily at the importer level, because we have FDA, we have this very like import regulations are very strict. There's DNA testing, so it doesn't really happen at the producer importer level. It happens at more at the restaurant retail level. And I think it has to do with education, and how do they communicate their seafood offerings to their consumers. So I think it's really important that we don't think, okay, well, everything is being mislabeled,
Right.
because as an industry, we're doing our best to not only like improve traceability in I mean like traceability, also like want to add transparency. For food safety reasons, we can easily track a container, but when we really want to look at traceability from who caught this product and when and how it made its way through that supply chain, there's a lot more complex, um things that need to be like handled. And as an industry, we're constantly discussing how can we improve traceability within our supply chains globally, because the big giants, can how to explain this? If you're vertically integrated, meaning that you own you are connected to the producer, it's a lot easier to have that linear traceability. But when you're depending on where you are in a supply chain, you might buy a product from an importer, and that importer buys it from a broker, and the broker might collect from the other different producers. So that gets a little more complex in terms of traceability to understand like where that product was specifically caught, right? Because there might be 300 vessels and they all report on one landing, and then how do you transfer that? Because as a industry, we're also like still doing traceability in paper. So how
Yeah.
do we digitize that information so it can be easily available? But yeah, this is like the rabbit hole of traceability. But as a consumer, all you need to know is that we are working towards food safety, make sure that there's a quality product, and also improving traceability within supply chains globally.
Right. And so, a big part of the recommendation, I had always gotten asked about, just a do like an example for folks. I'd always gotten asked about wild caught versus farm salmon. And an interesting quote that I came across was that if you want to protect wild populations, in this case, eat wild caught salmon. And I think that's an actual like an opposite of what a lot of people would think about that. So a big piece of that for salmon, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that because they're caught here in U.S. waters, our legislation and our restrictions are such that if there's ever a decrease in the stock, then there would be salmon would not be available. So we have such great regulations to look to monitor the populations that a lot of times some of these U.S. fisheries are some of the better options.
Yes. So, the wild salmon, it's a tricky, I think it's a tricky subject because clearly, we want to buy wild caught U.S. salmon, right, to benefit the livelihoods of the fishermen that depend on that, right? But the truth also is salmon consumption is so high that the wild fisheries, would not be able to like produce the entire amount of everything that is being consumed globally. So there is a need also for farm raised responsibly, farm raised, right? Because you want to make sure that the farms are well managed, that there's no escape. That's one of the concerns, right? That about approving aquaculture, offshore aquaculture, is that is there going to be escape of this farm raised of salmon? What is the impact of that into the native population? So these are risks that are being weighed in, and I'm sure somebody from Alaska will probably have a lot to say about not buying farm raised salmon. But in truth, there's a lot of salmon, oh God, farm raised salmon and farms that are really trying to improve the way that they operate so that they can, prevent scapes, that they don't have to use hormones, that they have a minimal impact on the environment, so we continue to enjoy this fish. Like we eat farm raised salmon, and that also has to do with taste. In our family, wild caught salmon it's delicious, but it has a little stronger, taste. So if you're looking for a milder taste fish, the farm raised salmon is a better option. That happens with my mom, grandma. She doesn't like the wild caught, but she likes the farm raised. So we eat farm raised, which is certified ASC, and we buy it from Sam's. So hey, if you have a Sam's card, go get some sustainable farm raised salmon from them. But yes, the other thing though is, yes, here in the US, because of in the country that we live in, there's a lot more regulations, but it doesn't mean that all the local fisheries are sustainable. So that's another misconception, oh, I only eat local, but sometimes the local stock might be, in overfished, or there might be some need for improvements, and it's important also to understand that, that what are some of the limitations that we have as a country, and what we can do to help improve some of that management of the fisheries that we have.
Can you talk about a little bit about how COVID has affected some of these smaller scale fisheries? Is that something you're familiar with?
Yeah, actually, COVID really disrupted some of the supply chains. I know, for example, in Peru, for the mahi mahi, because of the restrictions, a lot of fishermen couldn't, go out and fish, or there was a sort of like they didn't have access to protective, what is it, PPEs, protective
Yeah, the
equipment, well, the mask,
protection plan.
Yes, so they didn't have access to that. The government was really trying to contain the spread of COVID, so processing plants had to like work at 25% production. So that really like delayed a lot of the orders, and if people can fish, yeah, it really disrupts some of the supply chains. I read an article that in I think it was India, they had to dump a bunch of fish because when they were out fishing out in the high seas, and when they came back, they found that the government had shut down a bunch of the plants, and they were closing down, and they didn't have anywhere to buy, to sell their fish, so it had to get dumped. So it has definitely had an impact, and with the closing of the restaurants, the food service really took a hit. Retailers, though, increase their sales of frozen, and they have to sort of reimagine how do they do the fresh case. So there was like, a lot of adaptability in our industry. I think it really challenged the way we did business. I think traditionally the seafood industry was always, we have to be in an office. We working remote was kind of unheard of, and then they were forced to use technology in a way that they didn't have to before. So we have to get very creative on how we did business. But for the tourism sector, we also saw, the impact because of the closing of the hotel. So our strategy now is kind of like build back better, and how do we use this to really work with our supply chains as we open hotels to figure out how can we prioritize products that are, sustainable or more responsible and will get us to meet our commitment in the future, as opposed to just continue business as usual and work with how things were done before. So it really depends, on where you are in the supply chain. But I think overall we all took this as an opportunity to rethink how we do business. And from the NGO perspective, it's like right now we think it's COVID, but in the future it's going to be climate change, and it's going to be ocean acidification. And there's all these challenges, for our industry. So this is kind of like a taste of what could potentially happen if we don't address other issues.
And what you're doing with that hotel chain is really exciting. I love that your progression in your career has very much led you to create these meaningful moments in time, really. I mean, you're making really amazing progress in the sustainable seafood industry, and coming from such a unique perspective as yours. I think it's so valuable. Can you share a little bit about what that sustainable program looks like there, at the tourism level, at the hotel chain, and how that's going for you?
Man, this is really exciting for me because, I grew up in the basically with the industry, right? So I had that importer view, and then I moved to the NGO community. So I had to look at, with fair trade, look at the social and really dig into the fishery livelihoods. And now I'm in the tourism section, and we are like further away from supply chains, right? In geographies that are not your typical, oh, we're gonna like in the US, the hotels on the Caribbean and in Spain and the Middle East. So it's like, okay, what do we need to do here? And there's a lot of hotels that are doing great things with their commitments for sustainability. They have partnerships with like the World Wildlife Fund, and they're committed to MSC or ASC certifications. But then we wanted to push that, a little further. So we made really bold commitments to do like 100% responsible seafood by 2025. And then like, okay, how do we develop a strategy for this? And what do we need to do? And I'm learning that, the work that for 20 years we have done in the global north, with companies in the US, it might not necessarily translate to these importers and distributors in the Caribbean or in other areas of the world. So it's like, oh wow, we need to really focus on education now. So trying to bring all that knowledge and talk about what are key data elements. Why do we want to collect data? What are we doing on traceability? What kind of certifications exist? Expand our definition of responsible by including seafood watch ratings, yellow and green, by looking at the Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative, who that organization benchmarks eco certifications to a specific standard, and then saying, okay, we're going to accept certifications that have been benchmarked by the Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative. So, and then when this is like the sort of low hanging fruit, and then okay, what about local? What are we going to do about local? What about fresh? And then really work with our supply chain to understand what is it that we're consuming locally, what are the opportunities, what are some of the challenges, and then incorporate that. But with COVID, a lot of things kind of took a pause, where we reassess what is happening with the hotels, and how can we move forward to build back better. And but it's very exciting to bring, I think it's again with this holistic, right? Like now we think we're big, we're working with producers, and like producing countries, but we're also working with distributors, and we're also working with local producers, like local fishermen, well, not fishermen, but local distributors that buy from local fishermen. So now it's sort of like tying all those loose ends and trying to figure out how can we create the best impact. And we always say, like, what's best for our oceans, and we base a lot of that strategy around that, right? So
Mhm. Ocean first.
uh, yeah, no, and then the other very exciting part of this is like, how do you communicate to consumers, right? Because you have clients that are coming to your hotels not only to relax and have a great experience and enjoy this culinary servings that we have, but how do you also teach them about sustainable seafood and provide them with tools that they can bring to their countries and continue, eating better, right? Like, buying seafood that's good for the planet and good for people. So,
Mhm.
and I talk
I
a
love
lot. I talk a lot.
No, I mean, you are such a wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate your time with us this morning. I think we've learned so much already. I just want to close out. When you get a minute, let's put some of those websites that you mentioned in the comments section. I know the Seafood Watch Card is really handy for people to understand what's a sustainable option. That's put out through the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And you mentioned some others there. Some folks were also asking about what is the hotel that you're working with, and I think this is going to be a really neat opportunity for us to continue the conversation in the comments section as well. So for those of you who are still watching, make sure you leave your questions for us in the comments, and we'll be sure to get to those as well. Adriana, finally, you are clearly so passionate and so knowledgeable about seafood, and it's really refreshing to see that you've taken on such a leadership role in the sustainable industry and sustainable seafood industry. What do you hope to see? What do you hope to see in the future?
I would like to see people, and consumers like the Jane Does of the world that go to these retailers to really be mindful of what they're buying, not because, they heard that, tilapia is evil in Facebook, but that, we use this purchasing power to really go and reward, the retailers that are doing the right thing and ask the questions, because at the end of the day, a lot of this movement was industry driven. It was NGO and industry partnerships saying, okay, we need to do better because if not, the fisheries are going to collapse. But what I get a lot from industries like, oh, the consumers don't care. And I would like to change that. I would like to show them that consumers do care. I want retailers to see, hey, they care about the seafood you're putting out there because they're asking questions, because they're telling you, hey, great job for, sourcing sustainably, and change some of that discourse, right? Like, as consumers saying, what do you call it, the rise of the conscious consumer, and really
Mhm.
just drive that change, because there's a lot of fisheries that are not receiving the aid that they need for improvement, or that are being overlooked because industry says, oh, consumers don't care. So I think
Mhm.
if we show that we care, we can really increase impact on the water.
I love it. It's so super true. And I think we had a lot of people show up today for this interview, and there's going to be a lot more watching the replay. So, right there alone shows that there are people who do care and are people who are really interested in this conversation. So, thank you again, Adriana. For people who want to learn more about you and follow along on your efforts, where can they find you?
Oh my God, Seafood Ninja. I'm
See,
everywhere. Seafood Ninja. If you have questions about specific products or where to go buy, please message me. I'm happy to help. And we'll, link some of that information, like you mentioned.
perfect. That sounds wonderful. We thank you all so much for watching. Join us next week. We're going to continue this conversation about sustainable seafood. Actually, also next week, we're going to be interviewing another friend of mine, Adam, who is coming out of Maine, and he is faculty up there in Maine, and he also has his own oyster farm that he recently started called Water Farmer. I know you all are going to be fast friends. I'm going to introduce you to Adam.
Yeah.
So tune in for next Conversations with Paola next Wednesday. We're going to be shooting for an 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time start time. And again, thank you, Adriana. Have a great day,
Thank you.
everybody.
You too. Eat more seafood.
Eat more
Bye. Thank you.
seafood. That's right. Thanks.
Bye.